I'm going to take a moment here. I'm Ryan Quinn from the Center for Positive Leadership at the University of Louisville, and I'm just going to briefly introduce Mike, and we'll dive right into the program this morning. I'm looking forward to this. I've actually, as many of you know, I work with our presenters before they come, and it's always exciting to see what they birth in terms of the tools that they create and how we're going to put them together. And it's just been fascinating to watch the knowledge pour out of Mike as he's prepared for this. So just a quick, I'm going to share his biography with you, and then I'll turn the time over to him to run the showcase. But Mike is the founder of the founder and lead principal of the Learn and Lead Group, which is a coaching and consulting company focused on supporting leaders to consciously connect their values, thoughts, feelings, and motivations to thrive personally and professionally. He is also a principal with the national nonprofit Mindshare Partners, where he leads impact-focused advising, facilitation, and training for companies and leaders on creating cultures of support and mental health in the workplace. Mike has focused his career on social impact and seeks to bring a people-focused, inquiry-driven approach to creating inclusive and equitable learning environments and organizations where people can maximize their potential. Those are words that are always beautiful to me. He has a nonprofit executive, teacher, and social work background. Mike has started his career facilitating learning and development for aspiring nonprofit professionals at the New Sector Alliance. He then transitioned into social work and education, directing an entrepreneurship education program at NFTE, and developing the new curriculum for 21st century skills as a founding 8th grade middle school teacher at the Noble Network of Charter Schools. As an executive with City Year, he partnered with the national team to drive strategy and development and deepen the organization's impact nationwide. He holds a Master's of Social Work from the University of Michigan and a Master of Teaching from Dominican University. He graduated cum laude from Yale University with a BA in psychology and is a retired a cappella singer. Michigan Wolverines fan, that part's not retired. And lives with his wife, daughter, and 2 puppies here in Louisville, Kentucky. So thank you, Mike, for having us today. And welcome.
Thanks, Ryan. If I had known you were going to read that entire thing, I would have said, let's cut it to 2 lines and be on with it. But in addition to that, I will say I am the son of 2 therapists, so I think I come to this work around workplace mental health honestly. Proud father of a new 5-month-old daughter, and I was speaking recently and people said, put pictures of her in the presentation, which are not in the presentation, but I'm more than happy to share that with you. And I'm also someone who, throughout my journey, I think has really learned the power and impact that our managers and leaders can have on us, not only on our organizations and on our skill sets, but as us as people. And I think I've had both sides of the experience. Managers who really early in my career taught me who I can be as a professional and sort of showed me some of that potential. And also, I think many of you can relate, some managers who really tore me down and made me question, am I good at any of this, and what am I doing here? And so that's why I'm really passionate about this work around training managers and leaders and working with them to recognize the responsibility and power that they do have, not only for their organizations, but in people's lives. Because many of you are probably familiar with some of the research that people will say that their manager has as much of an impact on them, more impact than their doctor, more impact than their therapist, and as much of an impact as their partner. And I think if we think about our own lives and what we talk about, what we experience, what our experiences are, we can relate, right? So much of what we do and talk about is about the people we work with, the people we're around that create those environments. So I don't know about you, but I tend to spend most of my days, I get started, now it's with my daughter, doing all the things that go into early parenthood, and then running around from place to place, meeting to meeting, often Zoom to Zoom. And so I thought we'd just start out by really grounding here and doing a little visualization that will help us get engaged here. So wherever you are, if you want to sit up a little straighter, if you want to close your eyes, you can. You do not have to, but just feel your feet on the floor and take a couple breaths. And what I want you to do is to imagine a time when a leader or manager helped you feel truly heard, understood, and supported. When you felt a sense of ownership, of trust, and even happiness in a project or a role at work. Choose one experience and really think about it. Notice what sensations come up for you, what it felt like in that moment, what you thought, how you were, how it impacted you. Just take one more breath. When you're ready, if your eyes are closed, you can open them. And just turn to a partner and for a couple minutes share. What did that leader or manager do that influenced how you felt? It was a situation, and what did they do that really influenced how you felt? Go ahead. All right, why don't we bring it back together? Finish up where you are in the conversation. You'll have plenty of more time to engage with each other throughout. Would love to hear from just a couple people of, if anybody's willing to share just a snippet of what was the situation and what was the impact that a manager or leader, hey, welcome, that a manager or leader had on you. Can I get one person or anybody who's willing to share? Yeah.
We all had similar things that we shared, which was really just about a sort of presence that our leaders offered and really active listening, and that we just felt really seen and valued.
Yeah. So even more than what they did, how they were, right? How they showed up for you, their presence. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, Hope.
I was going to say, interestingly enough, mine started in this building when I was at UPS, probably back in the early 2000s. I was in learning and development, but I was an administrator or an admin for my manager who was the facilitator of all the training, and I would just watch him train. I was just like, Chris, you are so amazing. Like, I want to be someday, but I don't have any stories. I want my stories. And he was like, you keep doing this, you'll be amazing, and you'll have your stories. Someday you'll have your stories. And so every time I think about that, and it's just weird that it was in this building when I was helping with UPS, because we did a lot of our training over here. It just, how that evolved through my career.
Thank you so much for sharing that. That's awesome. Yeah, I'd imagine for a lot of us, when we thought about those moments, right, this sort of sense of like joy comes over you, of like, wow, that person, those things they said to me, or how they listened to me, right, or how they saw something in me really motivated me to maybe even do what I'm doing now, right? In some ways, has disproportionate impact. And often if we ask that person to remember that moment, so often they can't, right? It was often interesting to me as an 8th grade teacher when I talked to my kids about what was the most, what meant something to them from the past year. They remembered things that I didn't think anything of, right? And that is the power that managers and leaders have in how they show up, who they are. And yet I think it's arguable that right now, today, being a manager and leader is probably as difficult as it's ever been, right? And part of that is just the number of things that are going on in the world. Everything from constant change, this feeling that everything is turning over, right? We've often talked about being in a sort of VUCA world, complexity and increased complexity, where so many things are going on that you can't have sort of just understand we're going to do this from the top and here's how it's going to roll out for everyone. Sense of ambiguity, I think that exists for many of us, and what's going to happen and what's going to go on in the world. New technology, and tons of talk obviously of AI and different companies trying to integrate it in whatever way they can into their company, regardless of whether it makes sense or not, but knowing that, this is technology that has a lot of power and is only going to get better from here, right? This is the worst that technology will be and will only get better. There's lots of talk of new generations coming into the workplace and the difference between Gen Zers coming into the workplace and what they expect of their managers and leaders and they expect of companies. There's obviously social media, now this environment in which everybody can have a voice. And in some ways that being great, the democratizing power of everyone having a voice, and yet creating a lot of challenge as a leader or manager for how do I lead and manage in that sort of environment. Globalization and existential threats potentially to our world. Lots of things going on that people are bringing into the workplace with them and create challenges for managers and leaders. And I think, and I know many of you agree, that that really requires a shift in how managers and leaders think about their roles, right? Think about their jobs. And so what we're focused on today is obviously a version of leadership and management, which is leading as a coach, leading with a coaching mindset, which I define really as fostering ownership and excellence by unlocking the growth and potential of every team member, right? Instead of this sort of command and control style of leadership that a lot of people learned, and a lot of people get managed to be managers and leaders because of, right? You don't get promoted to be a manager or leader because you're good at being a manager. You get promoted to that position because you're really good at having answers and figuring the things out. And then you move into management or leadership and you expect, well, my job is to tell people what the answers are. And yet because of so many of those factors that we talked about in the world, it doesn't always work or turn out terribly well. And it requires a number of shifts from people. This shift from being maybe a traditional command and control leader to being a leader coach or coach leader. So that means shifting from authority to leading from influence and inspiration, right? Leadership is not a role or title, it's a verb, it's an action. And all of us can lead ourselves and lead other people. It requires a shift from mostly speaking to mostly listening. And I think this is often the hardest one for managers and leaders. Most people in those positions can talk because they get rewarded for it, right? I've had the solutions in the past. I'm the one who can provide answers to people. This is what I get rewarded for, and that's therefore what I'm going to do. But the shift to empowering other people and helping them see their potential is so much more about listening. We heard active listening being one of that, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. It's about a shift from providing immediate answers to asking powerful questions. And understanding perspectives of other people to draw this out through your questioning. It's a shift from managing tasks to building collective ownership, right? From expecting perfection to encouraging experimentation and learning. If things are dynamically changing all the time, yes, best practices can be helpful, but best practices are looking in the past, not towards the future. And so you need to be able to elicit from people their ideas, what they think should happen because they're there on the ground in order to do that. It's a shift from expertise to catalyzing collaborative innovation, right? In some ways, how nice for a leader that you don't have to be the one holding everything together for yourself, right? It's this idea that you can rely on the team members and build a team so that other people can be contributing to that. You don't have to hold the burden yourself. And it's ideally a shift from reactive firefighting to proactive capacity building, right? Where you're actually enhancing the capacity of the people around you so that you as a team, as an organization, can take on the challenges that are in front of you. And there is research on organizations, a lot of organizations, right, this buzz term like being a coach manager or having a coaching culture as an organization, I think is very much out there. And there is some research on the influence and power that it can have. And so some of that research shows that managers and leaders who approach their role from a coaching perspective see increases in their people in their levels of happiness, job satisfaction, psychological safety, and creativity. And I know I'm preaching to the choir here because I know a number of you and what you do, but not surprisingly, when you think about this approach to leadership, right, it increases people's sense of engagement. Who doesn't want to be asked, like, what do you think about this? Let me listen to you and see the potential in you rather than tell you what I should think. It increases trust where people have a sense that you have my back, you have my self-interest, and we're actually learning to rely on each other. It can increase problem solving because, again, the whole idea of a team, if you have one person speaking all the time on a team, think about all the brain power you're missing out on, all the ideas you're missing out on in that room. And it can really help organizations because ideally you're actually enhancing the capacity of the people around you to build future leaders. Right? And there's so much out there about the shift we're going to see from baby boomers moving out of the workforce eventually and what's going to happen with that. And there's such an opportunity to be developing talent by taking on this approach to leadership that really is about building the capacity of the people around you. And yet the challenge, right? I think many people recognize, okay, this is part of my role. I need to be a coach leader, a coach manager. I should use some of these skills. So what's the problem, right? A lot of people recognize that. And the problem is that many managers and leaders think they're really good at this skill, but the people around them don't. Right? So much of coaching and leading is not who you are, it's what people tell you. A leader isn't a role, again, what you tell people. You're a leader when people tell you that you're a leader. And so they did a study of around 3,700 managers and leaders and basically had them ask them a series of questions about being a coach and their coaching style, and they filled it out. And these people were kind enough to allow other people to fill out the same assessment on them. And not surprisingly, about a quarter of leaders dramatically overrated their own skills in being a coach leader, right? Because these take practice, and they're not often the skills that we are rewarded for all the time in the workplace. And so the first tool we're going to take a look at, and we're going to move pretty, experiment. There are 5 tools in this toolkit. If you don't have the folder that has the toolkit in it, we're going to reference that a fair amount. So does anybody not have it? Just raise a hand and we can get it to you. Oh, great. People do. The first tool is a little self-assessment. Now, ideally, you could also use this as an other assessment. And this toolkit is really for managers and leaders to practice these skills, but also coaches and trainers. So my hope is people take this, find something useful, shift it in whatever ways you need to do, and use it. But there's a little self-assessment in there that I believe has 12 different skills and mindsets of a coach leader. You're going to rate yourself. Go ahead and do it for yourself. On a scale of 1, I rarely practice this, to 5, I consistently practice this. For each of those 12 skills, it's about 2 to 3 minutes to do that. And then there are a couple questions at the bottom. You're going to turn to a neighbor once you're done and respond to some of those questions about strengths, opportunities. All right, let's do it as a group. Would love to hear just from a couple people's experience of completing that assessment. Anybody surprised or made someone think either about, I'm really good at this thing, I should do this more, or this is kind of an area I want to improve on? Any reflections? Okay, say a bit more.
Well, it just was a little tough to be honest, right? Like, I really want to be, no, you're not.
Right. So with the self-assessment, like taking a look at, can be like, I want to be good at this, but probably not where I should be. That makes a ton of sense. What about for others? Yeah.
I was going to say that one on, and I gave myself 4 because I didn't start there, I've gotten there, but viewing mistakes as learning opportunities rather than failures. Because you immediately, when a failure happens, and Sean and I were just talking about this, you take it very hard, at least I do. And then I'm like, after I've reflected and I let myself be a minute in it, I'm like, okay, how can I use this to make me better? But again, don't necessarily start there with that feedback.
Yeah.
Just like, you failed, you screwed up, should I even be doing this thing for a living? I mean, those things that go through your mind that you redirect and you're like, I'm good at this. It's just, I can be better. But that one is, I think, for me.
It's a real tough one in a society that really values perfectionism. Perfectionism is one of the few sort of flaws that you can answer in an interview. What's your biggest weakness? Oh, well, I'm such a perfectionist on my work. I just try so hard in everything I do, right? It's one of the things we get lauded for and rewarded for.
I care too much about my job.
When it can really be challenging, right? It can be, yeah, go ahead.
For me, it felt good to fill it out because focusing on the part about spending so much time with individual team members, because that's a huge part of, that's a huge time investment, just the individual regular meetings, but then when something comes up, or like coaching issues, or resolving conflict between team members, or spending time in a team meeting working through issues like that, so much time, but really it's an investment. And so this was kind of a reminder that that isn't a distraction from the work, that is the work. And so that was like a good, filling this out was like yes, that's a good, reminder. That that's like.
Yeah. And an onus on organizations, right? So much of the work of being a leader and manager is to lead and manage. And how do you create time to do that? Is that actually built in? Yeah.
I had a former mentor who used to say, personnel takes up all your time. And she used to say that because that was her way of coaching sort of younger managers. Like, this is like normalizing. Like, yeah,
this is the job.
That's the job, taking up,
Yeah.
Yeah, it was interesting because everyone was busy writing down numbers and I wasn't writing down numbers and I was reading through this. And what came to mind, I don't know if this happened to anyone else, for each one of these there was a name. A time when I know I did not do it right. And I went home that night and I was like, oh, I can't believe I hammered Matt. I can't believe I did this. I can't believe I said that to Crystal. And every one of these had an instance where I was like, oh, shit. And that's what I was thinking about. I was thinking about all these little stories, but I guess the good news is that I did go home and worry about it.
Right, the learning, right, and the trick of not beating yourself up about it, but the value in like taking an assessment every now and then. I think this is a tool that could be used, again, you do it, you have other people fill it out, could certainly be used in a 360 is the idea. I think part of this, though, is also continuing to improve these tools. So anything that was missing for folks or felt off, just as feedback from me on the tool. Okay if you don't, but if you do, reach out afterwards, too. Yeah?
Maybe. The one that got me was the number 8 about giving feedback. It might even be helpful to have another item about giving feedback for, the positive or the negative or the developmental or.
I appreciate that. Yeah. So another, the
And
importance
on
of both
that,
receiving
even
and giving.
we're asking for feedback yourself.
Oh,
Yep.
And I think that's a huge thing, is that I'm not only giving it, but I regularly tell people that I'm coaching, when was the last time you asked for some feedback? And sometimes, we'll start with 360s, we'll do that.
Right.
I'm not talking about that formal feedback, I'm talking about just how am I doing?
After this, next time I do this, what should I do differently?
What am I doing that's motivating
absolutely.
you? What am I doing that's demotivating you? Don't be afraid to consistently ask for that feedback. Because we assume if we don't hear anything, it's good.
Right.
But that's not always the case.
Yeah. Well, I'm coming to you after this for that very feedback, so keep that in mind. So I appreciate that. Awesome. I also think this shift for some people can be pretty dramatic, right? From this idea of like, I am the person in charge. It is my responsibility to make sure everything goes well, and I do that by ensuring I'm controlling everything around me, telling people what to do. That is what leadership looks like. Versus this sense of leadership where almost like I'm seated at a table in a circle with a bunch of people, and I'm fostering the potential of that group. And there's some good research behind the power of visualization. We're realizing more and more that our brains doesn't really know the difference between us feeling into something and actually doing it. It's part of why our dreams can feel so real, because our brain is really good at recreating these things. And there's also I like the research around sports around it. They did some research where they actually had folks visualize improvement on free throws in basketball versus actually practicing it. And the folks who visualized it got almost as good improvements as the folks who were actually doing the thing. And so I think it can sometimes be helpful to have our clients or ourselves actually embody what does it feel like to be the command and control leader versus being the coach. And so there's a visualization in here that I'm going to walk us through so you can experience it for yourself and maybe use it with other folks. Now, if you are game for it, I encourage people to actually stand up for this, because you can actually feel what it's like in your body, because often it's just helpful to move around. If you'd rather stay seated, that is totally fine. And there are instructions in here, and I'm going to actually read the script to you. Ryan gave me good feedback. He was like, what if you're just an individual doing this? And I do think there's a way of using this where you can read through parts of it, pause, feel into it yourself, read through the rest. But I would really encourage, if you use it, to do it in groups. So wherever you are, go ahead and ground your feet on the floor. Try to relax your forehead, your face, your throat. You can close your eyes, feel comfortable. It's actually harder to close your eyes and keep your balance while you're standing, so don't feel like you have to. I don't want anybody falling over here. Just take a few breaths to ground yourself. And imagine you're putting on the hat of a traditional leader. It's firm, structured, and perhaps even heavy. This hat represents command and control, expertise, certainty. You're standing at the front of a room facing your team. You have all the answers. You're the expert. It's your job to direct, to decide, to drive performance. You need to know everything to always be right. You carry every decision, every result, every detail. Notice how you interact with your team. You're giving orders, providing directives, correcting mistakes. Your focus is on maintaining control and ensuring that tasks are done exactly as you've outlined. You're the fixer, the decision maker. Observe your team's reactions. They look to you for every answer, every decision. They wait for your instructions before acting. Take a moment to fully experience this role. How does your body feel? What emotions or thoughts arise? Now, slowly remove this hat. Feel the weight lifting from your head, the pressure easing from your shoulders, and take a breath. Now you're putting on a different hat, the hat of a leader coach. This hat feels lighter, more flexible, and open. Again, you're facing your team, but this time you're not at the front of the room. You're sitting with them in a circle. Feel the curiosity rising within you. You're genuinely interested in your team's thoughts and ideas. Notice how you interact differently now. Instead of giving answers, you're asking questions. Rather than directing, you're listening intently. Observe your team. They're engaged, sharing ideas, taking initiative and ownership. They're finding solutions together, growing in confidence. Feel the satisfaction of seeing your team members develop, of helping them unlock their potential. Experience this role fully. How does your body feel now? What emotions or thoughts arise? Now take one more breath, return to this moment, and you can sit down where you are. I'm curious, what was that experience like? What was it like to wear the different hats? What differences did you notice? Yeah.
With the traditional leader, I felt like
Can you speak up just a little bit so people behind you?
I felt there's the danger, the potential for me to be micromanaging. And if I have a diverse group with young people, middle-aged, and other mature, seasoned leaders as well, that could be dangerous, right? On the one hand, the seasoned, hey, look, I know what I'm doing. I don't need you to do this for me. And the other, different perspective, I'm creating a negative experience for those coming into this. Might be their first experience to work, and I'm not valuing who they are and what their leadership potential and talents are. I'm not asking them what they think.
Yeah. I can almost hear the concern, worry, fear coming out of you in that. Yeah.
So,
Appreciate that. What about for other folks? Yeah.
Well, with the first one, with the heavy hat, I think I kind of felt the weight of responsibility on my shoulders. I just felt more tense overall with the responsibility of making decisions on everyone's behalf. I think when we started sharing with the different hat, it felt more fun because like I could almost sense the engagement of everybody else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You can almost imagine like, oh, this is everything's not on me all the time. Like we can actually do this together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because echoing that, with the traditional leadership, I felt an anxiousness. Because in that role, I think we were seeking to control, but control is really kind of an illusion, so it's an impossible challenge that we're chasing. Whereas coaching as a leader is realistically achievable, so there's a comfort and a viability in that.
Yeah, there's sort of a difference of control, hoarding power versus like distributing it to others, which also can just feel better. Love that. So I really do encourage you, if you don't yet, either yourself or with your clients, folks you work with, like playing around with embodiment. I once did this where it was a facilitation of a workshop on speaking, and we did this where we put on the hat of like being the expert in front of the room versus being the teacher versus being the guide, the facilitator, and just the difference it feels and like how you then show up And we've agreed that so much of management and leadership in those moments that impact people is about how you show up. And therefore, that visualization, that sense of embodiment, I think can be really powerful. So, and you can follow along. This is actually in your worksheet as well. But as part of this toolkit, created then a coach model, right? So coach being an acronym that can help managers, leaders, really go through a sequence of steps that they can take in a conversation with someone else to show up with a coaching approach, a coaching mindset, right? And so I'm going to walk through that. Every letter stands for sort of a step in the process of a conversation and is accompanied by a core skill or a key skill. Now, obviously, there are many skills that are embodied under each of these, but I wanted to call out ones that felt most important or prevalent for people. So the first is C, connect and establish rapport. And we've talked about how part of the role, right, time as a manager and leader should be dedicated to relationship building. Because so much of trust, so much of existing in a world where you're relying on other people to do whatever it is being asked of them, and where you're being asked to give them feedback and help increase their potential is about that relationship that you have. And so proactively building relationships as a manager and leader is a skill and time that should be spent, right? Because I always think about it, I was talking to somebody about teaching with kids versus adults and them being so similar. I, as a teacher, thought about a bank account, right? When I had a kid who needed some feedback, I better have some deposits already made there because it makes it so much easier to take those deposits out if I've put something in. If they know I'm coming from a place of care, coming from a place of I believe in you, rather than coming from a place of I'm in charge and this is my job to tell you what to do or to give you feedback because I need you to get better, right? That's the core difference. We know that the sandwich method of feedback doesn't work, but it's really about, at its core, do people believe that you're giving it to them because you care about them? And so the core skill here is just around developing relationships and psychological safety, which I'm guessing many of us are familiar with, but this concept of being willing in a group of people to take a personal risk, to ask for help, to raise your hand if something doesn't make sense, to say, well, what about this? We aren't thinking about this. And you may be familiar, Google actually did a pretty extensive research into what makes an effective team at their company. And they expected it to be some sort of, what is the composition of the team? What are the different roles that people have? What are the qualifications of team members? And they actually came back with, I believe, 5 core assets of an effective team. And the number 1 was psychological safety, right? Do people feel comfortable challenging each other, asking for help of each other, taking risks? And so offered a few key skills in order to do that. Under relationships, asking questions about others' values, opinions, and meaningful experiences. I don't know if anybody of you have read Super Communicators, which is a book that came out recently from Charles Duhigg. But the piece about that book that I liked the most was he was talking about people build relationships when they are asked about their values, their opinions, or their meaningful experiences. And it's a really easy shift to be able to take a simple question and ask it in a way that really elicits people's opinions, values, and meaningful experiences. So instead of saying something like, what do you do? Right? You could say, what's your favorite part about your job? And it lightens people up so much more to be able to share, like, this is what I think about this. Oh, let me come up with something. Or asking someone's opinion about, what was a time when? Or what do you think about? Right? As a way to start really building deeper relationships in those sort of small talk situations. Creating psychological safety is about, again, consistently demonstrating that it's safe to ask questions and actually asking for voice. One of the measurements when they use it is how much do people talk in a group. And the more equal time that people have typically indicates higher degrees of psychological safety. And so I've also provided in there just a sample of example questions and actions that people can take for building connection. Mentioned a few of these, right? Just asking people to share. What would be most helpful from me? What does support look like from me? That's one of the ones I really like if you're a manager and just building relationship. Putting the ball in their court and saying, what does support look like from me here? I think can be really powerful. Around building safety, yourself modeling that vulnerability as a leader and manager is so important to sending the message that it's okay to ask these questions here. So you yourself saying, what am I missing? Or this is what I think, but what do others think? Or I'm a little worried about this. How are others feeling about it? Creates an environment where it's being modeled. We look to what do people do, not what do they say when it comes to hierarchical power differences. And so that can be really powerful. The O in the model stands for objective. So often in conversations with team members, we think we're being really clear and we're on the same page. And yet I love doing the activity where you then have people write down on a piece of paper, what is it you think your goal is right now, and how different those goals tend to be. And so actually spending the time to get clear on roles, expectations, and desired outcomes can be so important. And the key skill here, asking powerful questions. Powerful question is essentially an open-ended question, right? So it can't be answered with yes or no, that elicits someone else's perspective. The same set of data, when looked at from very many different perspectives, can lead to such different outcomes. Many of you have probably heard the story of, right, the elephant, where 3 blind people are touching an elephant, and one person is touching the trunk, and one person is touching, I think, the leg, and one person is touching the tail, and they describe it completely differently, right? The same thing, just from different perspectives. And so being able to clarify what is our goal, what are the outcomes we're looking for, can be so helpful. So questions like, what does success look like on this project? Why is this important to you, right? Getting to underneath, like, why is it important that we go after this? And what's the biggest challenge for you? So often when people come to us or come to managers or leaders, they actually, the sort of surface level thing they're talking about isn't really what's going on. And so being able to spend just a little bit of time to get their perspective, I think a really powerful question, what's the most challenging in this for you, can really get a sense of, oh, here's what they're looking for. Here's where they're really struggling in this. The A is around assess. So this is more exploration of perspectives, challenges and opportunities, but the key here before we talked about, we're really pairing, right, powerful questions with active listening. And I mentioned that one of the biggest shifts and probably the hardest for managers and leaders to make is to shift to listening. I love the activity where you tell a leader, from now on, I want you for a day, every meeting that you do, you need to speak last. Right? Because as soon as the most powerful person in the room, from a hierarchical perspective, speaks, everybody else is oriented towards what they say. So if they speak last, they're listening much more. I think we all know sort of the basics of active listening. So many of these skills are the things that were taught in kindergarten. I think there's a book that's titled like Everything You Need to Know You Learned in Kindergarten. And yet it's so hard to do. Also love the activity where you just have 2 people talk and you have one person focus on you are just listening. Your goal is not to come up with a response. Your goal is to simply listen and respond. And it starts to build trust that, oh, when I deeply listen, I start to hear things actually underneath the surface. I'm hearing what wasn't said. I'm hearing sort of the energy that's here behind it. It gives me so much more information. A few techniques to call out. Clarifying, I think, is really easy. Listen to the words people say and just ask them about it. So I do a lot of work where people are talking about stress or overwhelm. That means a lot of different things to different people. You said overwhelm. Tell me more about that. What is that? What's underneath that? Right? You can do so much better problem solving if you can really get underneath what is the perspective there. Paraphrasing, so many of us need, and this is really what coaching and therapy, core skill for all of that. So what I'm hearing you say is, and repeat it back to them. And people will so often be like, oh, that is what I'm saying. Yeah, thank you. Or they'll correct you. They'll say, no, that's not quite right. Here's what it actually is. Because so many of us need that sounding board. Summarizing for others and remembering to celebrate. Again, we talked about those deposits. Remembering just to say, like, that's incredible that you're being able to do that.
Mike, I was going to say something I found helpful with
Yeah.
listening when people come in, and even me one-on-one coaching, but even as a leader, somebody comes into your office and says, I need to tell you something. And so clarifying, do you need me to listen to fix, or do you need me to listen to listen?
Yeah.
Just listen to understand. Because I find what happens with a lot of leaders is they're always in listen to fix
Fixing
mode, as you said. And when someone just wants you to listen, and you start listening to fix, and I find this personally with my husband as well, I start getting really mad. He's like, hey, you came to me, and I was like, I did, but I did not.
I did not need that.
But you know, but professionally speaking, I think that's the case, is that we start going down this path of the help I think you need versus the help that you want.
Right.
And it's so for me, I've started clarifying. I'm like, I can just sit here and listen and not be trying to solve this problem, or not solve it, but.
And so often that's all people need. We think as a leader and manager, I need to fix this, when all they're looking for is just some listening and some validation. Like, yeah, that is challenging.
They say it, they're like, thanks. And you're like,
Yeah.
okay. I mean, you didn't even have to you didn't really, but you did.
Yep.
But I think it's important sometimes to clarify, and I think sometimes when you ask people that question, they're like, I don't know.
Yep.
You know, but it makes them think about it, because again, you can try and be helpful in your person.
Yep. Yep. Another way of saying that, are you being helped, heard? Do you need to be helped, heard, or held in your personal life? You can also use. And so often it's really just I need to be heard.
Yeah.
I've been trying to do that with my wife, but sometimes works, sometimes. The next C is about create, and this is around collaboratively problem solving. Right? So at this point, you've built a connection, you've better understood perspectives and what the problem is, and the key here is that collaborative piece. Right? It's not that you as a manager or leader can't have ideas. It's not that you shouldn't enter, do some prep of like, what do I think's going on and what might I say to this person? But it's how much attachment you have to those. Because what works for you might not work for that person, and you foisting your solutions on someone else may not work out the best for them. And so the key here is, using brainstorming techniques. I've been playing around with sort of the yes and, right? You can find 5% of what someone is saying that you agree with. Even if you totally disagree with what they're saying, there's 5% of it that you can say yes and, right, and build rather than tear it down. If you've ever done some improv, yes but versus yes and, it makes a huge difference in where the conversation goes. Thinking about, like, based on those ideas, doing some what's going to work best here, or identifying resources that will support people. That's the C. And then the H is to actually harvest at the end. And by harvest, I mean confirming here's where we're going next. Right? Particularly if somebody's been vulnerable with you, being able to say you're going to follow up on it is really important to them. And then using looping for understanding, which is essentially, again, because so much of communication is misunderstanding of what I thought was said or what I heard, coming back to that and saying, to summarize, here's what I think is the next steps are. You're going to by when, I'm going to by when. Or asking a question that is, what are your key takeaways? Or what are you walking away from today with? Because you might be surprised at what the most valuable part of the conversation was, and you can use that again. It gives you indicators of what that person values and what you can do in the next conversation. So that is the model that's there. On page 10, I actually then included for folks sort of a worksheet. The idea with this is if you're having a leader, a manager who is entering a conversation, they can have a one-page worksheet that has each of these steps, and they can identify what is one question, one skill that you want to focus on for this conversation, right? I want to focus on really listening deeply, and have them write that down. There have been some interesting studies on people who are having an interaction with others, and simply the writing down, the anticipating and writing down, like here's some things I could say, makes them so much more confident, even if they don't say them in the conversation, makes them so much more confident going into the conversation, right? And so it allows some preparation. Now we're running a little short on time, but I at least want to try and share the ideas using this then with there are a few scenarios. The last tool in there are 3 different scenarios that you can use for training, you can use for yourself, that are pretty common workplace scenarios where someone could actually practice the using a coach model. And the idea would be that you get into groups of 3 or 4. One person is going to play the manager or leader. Another person is going to be the person who is responding to them. The other folks are going to be the observers in the room. There's a scenario on the overwhelmed team member. There's a scenario on the conflict situation where 2 people are on conflict and you as a manager are noticing this. And then there's a scenario about career development, right? The growth conversation. You would choose and read the scenario, actually complete the coach worksheet, role play it, and answer the questions that follow. In the interest of time, because I do want people to get out of here in 10 minutes, let's do this. Go ahead and as a group just choose one of the scenarios. You don't actually have to role play it. I'll let you off the hook where you can read it and talk about it rather than doing the harder and more valuable thing, actually role playing. But spend some time, read through those scenarios, choose one as a group, and talk through the coach worksheet of if you were the manager or leader in that situation, what is one skill or question you would want to play with, okay? Choose one as a group, and you can talk about it, how you would approach it as a leader or manager. All right, I am sorry to interrupt your conversations. I heard a lot of great discussion. And you're welcome to stay after 9 o'clock and actually play it out if you really want to. And I recognize people have places to be and jobs to do. So, but I'm curious, feedback from me. This is the first time I've sort of handed out these scenarios and played around with the coaching model. So what did people think of the coach model and the scenarios? Like, what do you think would be challenging for someone using it? What do you think would be helpful? Yeah.
So I really like the model. I think one of the questions I have is I'm actually leading a coaching circle right now and of kind of newish leaders. And so one of the questions I anticipate they would have is, what if I don't have psychological safety with my boss? So, they're working in a department that doesn't have that. So what would you tell them?
Yeah, I think that is a challenging situation. I would talk to them about how they can create that among their team, one. Like how can they've had the experience of not having that. So if they have a team themselves, how do they work on doing that among themselves, right? And then I would have them think about like other supports, if we're talking about managing up and encouraging that among their broader team, what other supports and resources do they have around that, right? So ideally, can they work with others who are peers of their boss that are helpful in some way, shape, or form? Where are the places where they can kind of carve out, like, all right, I can create this space for my team over here where we can work on this project, and part of my job is to actually, in some ways, protect my people from what's coming from above. And so often that is true, unfortunately, for managers, is it's about them, like, actually creating space for their team to create a separate environment, a separate space where they can be doing great work and to protect their people in some ways from what's going on from above them. I do think inevitably, like we talk a lot about culture change within organizations, and we often say like culture change does involve everyone in an organization that creates the environment, and managers have a lot of power, and eventually power differential and hierarchy does matter. It gets hard at the end of the day if leadership is not bought in at all or is on a totally different page. But that then becomes part of the responsibility of, okay, I don't feel psychologically safe, but how can I either influence this person or influence other ways that can support my team? I don't know. That's what I would say. Others? We have many other experts here. Yeah.
I think not having psychological safety with your own supervisor is something you could take through the coach model. Like, I think it's something you could talk through about why is that important, what is my goal here, and how can I actually brainstorm and start to solve or impact that.
I like that. I think doing like if they're in a meeting that's a broader team meeting with their team, doing something like, hey, I noticed that there weren't a lot of people talking about in that meeting. And I wonder, like I've seen people add a lot of questions and value in other settings. I wonder what's going on in this particular dynamic. And sort of like making an observation and a wondering, not doing it in a way that's like, I have the answer, you're the problem, because that can be challenging. But I do think doing it from figuring out what is their boss most interested in. And if it's not in relationships, but simply in getting results, tying it to how this dynamic is not creating the results that we want. So it's really finding what matters to them. So I like that.
Leading up, giving that feedback, and I encourage, and I'm like, I know this is not easy, but I always want to give the benefit of the doubt, and maybe this leader just doesn't know. Yeah. Is completely unaware. So I always, tell them to set it up of just exactly what you said. I've observed this. Have you?
Yeah.
And what do you think is contributing to this?
And trying to doing it with genuine curiosity, because again, perspectives. People have totally different, and maybe they're responding how they are for whatever. Maybe they have a rationale, but being able to understand that then can maybe help you be a more effective manager and operator.
And influence a light bulb to go off in their head.
Yeah.
If you can.
I think so.
I think that's a great question. Other sort of opportunities you see in using this with groups, challenges?
Just one thing, it seems like we all really appreciated having the question banks.
Yes.
So if we didn't know where to start, or if we had an idea, we took as a starting point, we could sort of make it our own.
Yeah, I think thinking about if you're using this for training or working with others, like what scaffold? Again, teaching, this is like a K-12 teaching thing for adults. What scaffold are you putting in place so everybody can get to the same point? So if somebody starting from ground zero, doesn't know anything about psychological safety, for instance, how can you help build them towards being able to come up with their own pieces? And one easy way is start with this. Just complete this sentence, right? Use this phrase. And so, having those word banks is great.
I'm curious, obviously in these scenarios, this was a one-on-one. Do you see this process working in a group setting as well?
Yes, I think aspects of it for sure. I think a lot of the same principles about, again, being able to connect with people, being able to, as a group, I think it's about treating the group as an entity in some ways. So it gets a little more complex because you have their individual relationships among that group, but the group itself can also be an entity, I think, where you use at least parts of the coach model and a lot of the same skills. Connecting, be able to clarify, like, what is our objective here, being able to glean perspectives from different people, collaboratively problem solving is great to do in a group, even better, and then being able to harvest, like, what are we learning here? Here's what I'm taking away, what are others taking away? So I think can certainly be used and applied in a group situation. Yeah, appreciate you pointing that out. Awesome, I recognize it's a couple minutes past, so thank you all for being here.
Let me just say, as people are heading out, in your PowerPoint slide copy that you have here, the very last slide has a QR code. You can use this to get to our website, use this to get to follow us on LinkedIn. Earlier, people were asking about the tools. The tools are all free. Both Mike's today and the ones we've done in the past are on the website. So if you want to print them out and make other copies and do whatever else, you can go to the website and get them there and use them that way. So thank you for everyone coming in today. We'll see you in a month or whenever you come next.
Awesome. Thank you all.